Hello, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm going to be taking you through this webinar today on teaching business English. Could I ask a favor, which if somebody could just write a quick message to say, hi, we can hear you and see you. Okay. Then I'll know that we're all good to go. It's always good to have a confirmation. And if either of those is a problem, also please send me a message to say, hang on, we're not getting it for some reason or other. I'm just checking in. As far as I can see, everything looks fine from my end, but it would be nice to have some confirmation of the fact. Okay, so brilliant, all clear, all clear. Thank you very much, the people who just sent that message in, much appreciated. Okay, right then. So, as I said, my name is Mark. I will tell you a little bit about myself, but I might do that a little bit later in the presentation because we do have a lot to get through today. So I'm going to click straight on with the slides, and I'll sort of talk over them because a lot of them is information itself, kind of self-explanatory. But while you're having a quick look through that, this is kind of what we'll be dealing with today. Quite a lot, and there's another page worth of it as well. First thing, though, is well done for showing an interest in business English. I would say it is such a fascinating area, and not always for the reasons that you think, which is that you're a business person or you've got experience in the business world, and you would like to get back into that in some way. Now, those are perfectly viable reasons, but, and this kind of goes into the second bullet point as well, you don't need to, or sorry, the third bullet point, who can teach business English. You don't need it in particular. What you'll find with business English is it is really interesting. You meet fabulously interesting and enjoyable people to teach. You meet motivated individuals who are desperate to move on and who rely on you and show their gratitude to you for what you are doing for them in a way that you don't really get in other parts of English teaching, or not sufficiently anyway, in my knowledge, in my experience. So these are the other things that we'll be looking at as well. So as you can see, it's kind of a mixture of the actual teaching and a bit of the sort of logistics as well. And obviously at the end we'll tell you about our own TEFL business English course, which is such a valuable thing to take on, maybe once you've got your qualifications through TEFL Academy as well. Okay then, so first question, and it's a pretty straightforward one. What is business English? And there is, well, as you can see here, it is part of English for specific purposes, and obviously ESP can cover quite a lot of different things. Just to get the acronyms out of the way, we also normally talk about a separate pile, which is EAP, English for academic purposes. Obviously, we're not dealing with that today. But I think the specific part of this is really, really important, because the specific, and this is the glory of teaching business English, the specific is very much specific to your student. So those of you who have experience of teaching in say language schools, for instance, will have that idea that you've got 12 individuals, 20, 30 individuals if you're singularly unfortunate, and you have to teach a kind of one size all. You have course books, that you'll probably know the names of. You'll have seen Cutting Edge, which comes up in our level 5 course, and the hundreds of others in the publishing English in the TEFL industry, and you have to teach according to a curriculum. That goes out of the window when you're teaching business English, because here you are teaching it to the person or to the people, and they will guide you and they will tell you what they need. Not just they will tell you by what they actually say, but the way they say it, and that will tell you what they need as well. So it's a great way of really getting into really getting into what you need to do and becoming a much more independent language teacher, but again with the rewards that come from that are absolutely vast. Okay, so who wants to learn business English? Well, quite a lot of people for one thing, and there's various reasons for that. Just to give you a kind of definition, business English students are those who conduct or who would like to conduct business with English speaking companies and those who use English as a shared language. Very important, the shared language with companies outside of the Anglosphere. Also lots of job seekers, and for job seeker in general, the focus is much less on grammar and more on those specific skills. And again, that's the whole idea that I just mentioned with the course books. In the course book in Unit 3, it says, right, we're doing the present perfect. They don't need the present perfect in business English. You do not teach the present perfect. Instead, we look far more at specific skills and specific language and specific vocabulary. And that is specific, again, to the individual or individuals in your class, which we'll again go back to. Just, I'm sure you know the term, but just in case, lingua franca, in other words, the common language, the shared language in this case. Whoops, so I think I've just knocked that and gone on to the next one. The shared language that two people who maybe do not have English as a first language will use in order to conduct business. And that is why business English is still such an incredibly popular thing to learn and therefore to teach. The demand at the moment and for the foreseeable future seems to be pretty much endless, and I see no reason for that not to continue. Sorry, Hanu, I'll take your message off. I'd forgotten it was there. Okay, right. So that's just sort of three parts of it, but there are most certainly more. The reasons for why business English is so important: globalization, technology, two simple reasons why, and obviously technology, communication. We communicate at ever faster speeds, and a very, very high need for business English across so many different realms that I can, for example, finance, law, engineering, medicine, hospitality, aviation, IT, and the one that I teach in mostly, which is military, which I may mention briefly later. These are all forms of business because they are all forms of transaction in their own way. Okay, and now kind of the big question: who can teach business English? TEFL qualified teachers. And I repeat, you do not need to be a business person or a former business person to teach business English. It is a very different beast to teaching, but always remember, it's something I always think of. It's always the way that you need to express it, really, or express it to yourself, is that they are a subject matter expert in what they do. You're a subject matter in what you do, which is English teaching. And business English, successful business English classes are more than most normal classes. They are an amalgamation, a coordination, a collaboration between two people or a teacher and the class, far more than I think you get in a normal class teacher student dynamic. You are truly working together on a shared project, which is the glory of teaching business English. And I hope I can illustrate a bit more of that while you're doing it. While we're going through this, while we're going through the webinar. How you get into it very often, you sort of stumble into it. Certainly I did. I was asked to teach a group of Spanish students at a bank in the City of London, which I ended up doing for about 7 years, and had an absolutely great time doing that. I'll probably bring some of that experience to bear while talking about while talking through the webinar. as well. You might be asked to ask a specific to teach a specific class while you're working in a language school, and that then opens doors to further things as well. So just to go through the common question, can I teach business English if I have no business experience? And the answer is yes. We often, of course, teach topics we have no knowledge about: global warming, technology, in my case, medicine. We don't question our ability to teach about these things. If you go through a course book and look at the 12 different titles, for every unit has a different topic, how many of those topics do you know a great deal about? Not all of them, that's for sure, and yet you will teach them quite happily. So we shouldn't have to question ourselves when we teach business either. So now we're going to have a deeper look at what it entails. And well, you can have a quick look at those. Some of these are more important than others. Just think while you're looking at those about what are the various English specialisms within what you have to do here. So if you're writing emails to customers, what's specific about that? Well, you have to use, obviously, email language. Depending on the customer, you have a distinction between formal and informal. Chatting with foreign colleagues, of course, that might be for small talk, but that might be about getting your point across as well. Talking to customers might be formal, might be informal. Participating in international conferences, how do you bring your own experience as a business person to bear in a situation like that? Giving a presentation is a big one because so many native English speakers do it so badly. So think about with presentation, maybe you might have to work with a student on intonation because their first language, they deliver everything quite flat, and they actually need to really hit the points that they got to make. You've got 3 or 4 big points that you're making throughout a presentation, and so they've got to really stress those points so people really know when they've got to pay attention and pick up the main points, because otherwise it's all flat and it all sounds like soup to a lot of the people who have gone to several presentations already in the same day. Engaging in small talk, well, that's a pretty simple one. You could say that's kind of an intermediate level, depending on what they need to talk about. So there's all sorts of things that it might actually be, and they're all related to stuff that you will teach in a general class, but then you have to pick out and think, okay, how do I apply that to the class that I'm looking at? There are others here. Having a job interview, obviously that's your job seekers. Conducting interviews, and there's a good one. Negotiating, so that might be conditionals. Well, if you do this, then we will do that. Making suggestions, debating topics, all sorts of things here. How to participate in meetings. Now, I'll give you I'll use another little bit of my experience here from what I've done. I used to run a language department, and the main thing we did, this is prior to Brexit, I shall mention, through gritted teeth, and we used to do a lot of bringing people in. We were dealing with the language training for people who have been brought in from their company to move to, most frequently, London, not always, sometimes Manchester, Birmingham, elsewhere, but largely to London. And so it was people at vast expense there. They were moving their family across for 3 years. Their kids were being sent to normally a private school. The company was paying for a house in the middle of London. Vast amounts of money were going into this. And then this highly, highly qualified individual, who's maybe had a good level of English but not fantastic, found it very hard to get their point across when they went to meetings, because all these English speakers, all of whom spoke just one language, judged them on their level of English. And so as soon as they hesitated or took a little bit longer to express something, would interrupt. And this person at vast expense, who's been brought over, enormous amounts of money, then could not do half of their job because the English people weren't listening to them. So you think about how, if you're speaking to a business English student, how you deal with a situation like that. And in this situation, what we did, we started looking at specific expressions. Could I come in here? And could I come in here is a lovely phrase, because it means, actually, it's a very polite way of saying, you lot shut up. This is my time to speak, and I'm going to make my point. And just little things like that listen to as individuals you could communicate something that made a huge amount of difference, not just to that person, but to the effectiveness of that person's job, and therefore the entire investment that's gone into moving them at vast expense across from one part of the world to the other. So you see how I mean, how individualized it gets, and that's what this entails. Okay. Right, so getting started. A needs analysis. Now, this is, how do we say a needs analysis here? This is not what you would normally think. Again, we talk about working business English as being very, very individualized. Therefore, what a business person does not need is a form that you've got that you push under the nose and say, fill that in. A needs analysis has to be, you're listening to somebody. Okay, what are they saying? What do they need? They will share their frustrations. The little story that I just told you came out of somebody's frustrations at what was happening to them and how they couldn't perform effectively in their company, and the solutions that were therefore found for it. If you do a needs analysis, you maybe, you're going to make notes. Of course, you're going to make notes because you're a professional. But you're also going to listen, and you're going to ask follow-up questions. Okay, how do you feel? What were you doing? Why was this situation? How do you feel this situation happened? Why was it happening like that? And what can we do to try to help you to overcome this situation? A friendly atmosphere. If you're actually listening to somebody and asking them those questions, you have a friendly atmosphere because you have a student in front of you who knows they are being listened to, perhaps for the first time in quite a long time, and is communicating what they need. Of course, here, because business English is so varied, I'm talking about a very specific situation here. But like I say, it was an individual reaction to an individual situation is the example I've given you there. I could give you others. It might be a job seeker, it might be online, it might be somebody who's got very little communication with English speakers, or all of which is clearly something that you are going to have to take into account. I'll give you some possible questions as well, simple ones. Do you ever talk on the telephone in English? Big question. What do you find challenging about learning and speaking English? Do you speak English with English speakers or non-native English speakers? If it's native English speakers, how do they react to you? If it's non-native speakers, do you have any difficulties with understanding? Do you use it? Obviously, are you using it at work because it's a business English course? Do you use it at home? Do you use it in your leisure time? You can, of course, ask questions about somebody's past, somebody's present, somebody's future as well, because then even when you do that, you're listening. What are the what's coming out? What forms are coming out? Where are the mistakes being made? Note them down. You don't need to tell them about them, but they're there. And that may form the basis to a grammar lesson later. But it's a grammar lesson that comes out of you hearing what this person has said, not doing a grammar form because they're about this level, so they probably need to do this grammar. No, it's grammar that's related exactly to what they need. Where do they need to use English? Which again comes back to the different situations that we saw there in terms of in meetings, presentations, informal chats at conferences, etc. Who do you usually speak to in English? Now, that might be a very big one. Are they speaking to subordinates? Are they being brought in to run a team of English speakers? Or and this is often the case, their new line manager is English, and so they've very comfortably been speaking Spanish, Portuguese, whatever, for the last 5 years. Things move within a company, mergers are made, departments are brought together, whatever it may be, and what do you know? They've got a new line manager who's expecting everything to be communicated to them personally in fluent and idiomatic English. A different problem. All of these things come up the whole time, and this is what makes it great for you to have to react to, as you can imagine. Okay, right. Trying to think where I am on my slides for the moment. This is other things that are quite important. Business students may already know quite a bit of general English. Now, this is one of the reasons I think why business English is still the lingua franca, because people know a lot already. They're not picking it up from zero. As I said, you avoid grammar and vocab lessons unless, I will add the rider, that unless they are very specific to something that they need. You do lots of research. That's research that you can do, obviously part of your needs analysis, it's part of your follow-up questions, but it can be other things that you do prior to the lessons as well. In finding out about what their company does, finding out something about the industry if you know nothing at all about it, having an idea of where its major markets are or something like that, finding out who the competitors are. It's good fun doing this. It's not homework for you. It's actually interesting to find out quite a lot of this. And remembering there are adults, tweak tasks to suit their age. Now, I would say I looked at that one, and I have to say that nowadays life is considerably easier. Even somebody of my age has dimly began to realize the uses of AI when it comes to, when it says tweaking tasks. In other words, if you need to do something on grammar, that you can ask Mr. Chat GPT or whoever to give you an exercise, make it for, an adult class of this level, make it specific to this particular area of business. So much you can do with this. If you haven't started doing that, then I strongly suggest that you start experimenting with it. And it's such a valuable tool, and it saves us hours and hours. And those are hours that can then be channeled much better into another aspect of your work instead. One of those aspects might be saving money and time, but it can also be to do with making other parts of your teaching more effective. And also, as it says there, include all the necessary skills. So that means include speaking time. Try to decrease your own teacher talking time and increase student talking time. Conversation every lesson. Listening, always some listening, and some heads down thinking. Doesn't have to be reading a lot, but even maybe reading a little bit to discuss. Anything like that is great. Your energy level, there's quite a lot to do with the conduct here, I think, as well. I would say, in my experience, and I'm talking maybe 20 years ago, teaching in London, most English teachers look like they've fallen out of an aeroplane or so. They're not the best dressed bunch. If you want to give across the right impression, you've got to be you've got to dress like a professional person, and it just starts everything else off on the right foot. They're a professional. They have the right to expect professionalism from you, and it makes an awful lot of things so much easier, that you're not having to work to overcome the impression that your grubby trainers and your t-shirt with a band name gave them to start off with. These are obviously straightforward things, but they're not small things either. Your energy levels, you've always got to go in with a good energy level, and you also have to remember that some of the time they are going to need encouragement. They're going to be come back from a conference or something like that. They're a bit tired. We'll talk a little bit more about the ramifications of this later, but there's all sorts of things that you need to bear in mind. They're not like your average English students who have one task, which is to get up in the morning and get to the school for 9 o'clock. These have got people a lot of other things going on. Obviously, if they're older, they may well have families as well, so they've got commitments in that area, and they get called out very, very quickly to do to attend meetings that their boss or to do something their boss wants done yesterday, and that unfortunately has to take the priority over your lessons. Another reason to be professional, to be energetic. The better you do, the more likely they are to come back and keep the faith with what you're doing. It does also mean that if it's either you or the company that you're working for, you would expect some form of cancellation policy. So if you get there and the lesson is cancelled, you darn well should be being paid for it all the same. 48 hours or 24 hours is the norm. And if that isn't being adhered to, well, you may want to rethink your position on that one. Also, for the same reasons that I've just mentioned, attendance, or if you have, say, 6 people in a class, attendance is often very, very low as well. Again, don't take that personally. There's 2 things you can do about that. If you have 1 person in a room when you're expecting 6, don't go in there and go, oh well, this is all. Go, great, just you, just me. We're going to do some serious learning, and you've made yourself a friend for the rest of the course. Really try to see such things as an advantage, and really do everything I've talked about, which is really listen, think, let that person think, oh, I'm so lucky. I just got the teacher all to myself. They really listened. They corrected my mistakes. We had a good fun. I didn't notice the time pass. You come back, you've got somebody on your side, and that will be a really valuable thing moving forward. And of course, it's made the hour or 2 hours of the class fly by, instead of you going in with the attitude of, oh, I only got 1 person, this is going to be no fun, it's going to be a real drag. You've made your own life a bit better by doing that. Okay, right then. So some of the advantages I've talked about already: the variety, the flexibility. Now, the flexibility here can work both ways, because obviously classes come out of I worked around their lessons, so that often means that they have more difficulties making the lessons, and they happen to be in the evening and stuff like that. Can I just break off here before I do anything else? Somebody has very rightly sent me in a question. Now, thank you for the question. I will deal with that at the end. I should have said at the start, and I will reiterate now, if you have any questions, there will be a Q&A session at the end. If, however, you have a question right now, pop it straight out there, and obviously I'll bring it up and show it to everybody and try and deal with it. So you can either wait till the end, but if you've got a question, just write it out. It's just good to sometimes do it while you're thinking about it. So thank you. I should have done that at the start. Okay. The variety. You will never meet a better variety people than you do in business. They are all so different. They're different in age, they're different in aptitudes, they're so different in what they want to do outside of their lessons and outside of their job as well. They tend to be very talented people, open-minded, pretty much the opposite of what I would have thought that they would have been, 25 years ago when I started. You learn about business. It's a fascinating area because it just covers the whole of life. There's no one size fits all to it. It develops your skills because it challenges you, and it challenges you for the reasons that I mentioned, that you have to react spontaneously to things, and you're dealing with so much with individuals. You're dealing with individual errors that you need to decide if you're going to correct there and then, or if you're going to make a note of them and deal with them later. It's the opposite of working with a curriculum in that way. Your own language skills, because you have to think on your feet a lot more. So you get to, okay, I know what the difference is between this and that, and you have to start thinking about it very quickly. Really helps you to get on point with your understanding of the language. The students, even if their attendance sometimes leaves something to be desired, they are super motivated. They can see why they're there. They've got a reason to be there, and they want to do it. The one that I tend to use, I don't do very much. In fact, I'd say the last 18 months, none. I don't do very much teaching in a language school, and I decided after a certain point that I was just fed up with my class, or some of my class, coming in half an hour late with a Costa coffee and a croissant and saying what's happening. And I sort of found it was very difficult. This is going to be the opposite of anything like that. If you don't have to deal with discipline. The discipline that they will have there is the discipline they have for themselves to actually put themselves through a lesson, very likely at a time when they could easily be going home and spending time with the kids instead. they really want to be there, which is just wonderful. And it's a compliment to us that what we do is so important. Other things as well, creativity. Yeah, I wonder, it sort of says that you'll develop your creativity, of course. Now, I think you develop your spontaneity more than you develop your creativity. But your creativity, again, I suppose, in the area that I just mentioned concerning AI, that, okay, you've got a highly specialized bunch of people or a highly specialized individual. How are you going to create something that's really, really worthwhile for that person? And you can't just go through and just give them a generic tense gap fill multiple matching exercise that you picked off the internet. We will, however, talk about materials later, nevertheless. Okay, these are the challenges that I think I've pretty much mentioned the first two here. Of course, a lot of lessons happen after hours or before hours. Online can partly, at least, overcome that, but not entirely. You do come a distant second to the company and the boss that pays their wages, salary, I should say. And the mixed levels, that's often, you have smaller classes, but you often have them at slightly different levels. That, again, should just be seen as a challenge and not as any kind of obstacle. I think it's something that, again, makes you better. You'll have to teach, as I say, in the evening, attendance problematic, mixed levels with classes. And also the last one that I'll mention there is that with mixed levels, often you can have managers and non-managerial staff in the same class. And that is something that takes a bit of looking after as well. It's pretty good to be aware of the dynamics, especially when you're asking people to pair up, or who you need to correct, depending on the culture, who you need to correct as well. And the way that you might do so, if there's any possible risk, depending on the culture and the relationship of the people, any possibility of loss of face. Sometimes it can be good fun, because sometimes, depending on if there's a good relation between the managerial staff and the non-managerial, it's the managerial staff that can get corrected a little bit more heftily at times, to the great delight of everybody, including the managerial staff, if you've got the right dynamic in the classroom. And the career opportunities are vast, frankly. Online, that's maybe the easiest place to start. But I think what's lovely about business English teaching is that, unlike, I would say, most language school teaching, some language school teaching, but not all, one thing can lead to another. If you meet somebody via online and they might like you so much that they recommend you to their company or something like that, it can very, very frequently snowball in a really, really nice way. Corporate, obviously, you go into a business and that's great. You become one of the family. You get invited to the parties. You get the free food. And obviously private, for, again, highly motivated individuals who really feel that they need to work on something, and they feel it so strongly they're happy to pay for themselves. That's a motivated student, of course. Right. So resources, as I have mentioned to you, AI is the single biggest thing I think you'll use nowadays. The best way of marrying up their specific linguistic needs with their specific specializations, and to bring the two together in that way is absolutely great. And it requires from you a knowledge of what they do, which is questioning and listening, and also, of course, your language knowledge, that you can hear where the mistakes are, you talk about the mistakes, and then you give them further work to back up possibly the correction that you have made, in the class. Okay, so teaching resources, you have our own, and of course you have our Business English course. Articles are always useful. Company websites and things like that can be fantastic. Like I say, it's not just about their teaching resource, it can also be about the knowledge of the company. the company itself. British Council is great. One Stop English is also great, but the biggest resource that you always have is your ears. You're listening to what they say, and you're acting on that. The biggest and best resource that you will ever have is how you listen to them and what you do with the knowledge that you have picked up. A few others here, as you can see. And some of these can be great and very, very specialized as well. TED Talks, YouTube videos. A lot of companies, of course, often produce videos, advertising material, and often, in more content-driven industries, they produce a lot of material. Why not use some of it? Very interesting sometimes. You can play, surprise, surprise, in large companies, the employees have no idea what's actually being produced, on behalf of them. So it's very interesting sometimes to, to go through a small bit of a video. Never show them 5 minutes. They don't need 5 minutes. They don't need 10 minutes. They need 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And maybe for them to come up with the discrepancies between the company as it is presented on screen and the company that they know and work for. It can be a great activity there on conditionals, for instance. Sorry, not on conditionals, on comparatives. I should have said. All sorts of things that you can use. A very common one that I would use as well is a business report. BBC, Radio 4. They do the business report. I'm trying to think between 5:30 and 6, and then shortly after 6 o'clock. Anyway, there's always stuff on there. One little thing for this, and it's a fairly obvious thing, is with business reports, anything like that, if you can get something that's downloadable, then it can be a permanent resource, and it's something you might be able to use. Again, if it's just for listening, it's maybe not particularly specific to your student, but if you can use it again just to practice the skill, then that's fantastic. So anything that's downloadable rather than something that is going to disappear after 2 or 3 days can be very, very useful. Okay, now I will just mention an overview of our own course. The chances are that you've already enrolled. It's got 3 mandatory units, so actually kind of the same as the level 5 courses that we teach. They're test assessed online, and an end of course assignment if you take the course separately from our main course. Okay, sorry, I'll carry on. The 3 units are an overview of teaching business English, which you've had in large part now. Techniques and activities for teaching business skills, and intercultural awareness, receptive and productive skills. The intercultural awareness is fabulous. I do remember once trying to work on small talk with a Chinese. I think they were Chinese. I apologize to China if they weren't. And we were trying to do small talk, and his first question that he thought he should ask at a conference or something like that would be, how much do you earn? And it's really interesting to see how in some cultures these things are absolutely fine. In other cultures, you would never ever ask that. And so things like that are very, very important as well. That's something else where you're the subject matter expert. You know about your country. You may not know about business practice, but you certainly know about how people actually interact in any kind of social setting. Okay, so just to go by, just remember about this, because it is important. English is still such an important language, and it's by far the most dominant language in business, and fluency is an essential for anybody who wants to join that global workforce. And as you can imagine, an awful lot of people still do. International companies use English as a shared language to conduct business, even between countries where English is not the language. There will always be a high demand, always. Quite a long word, but at the moment there is believed to be something like 1.5 billion people who are looking for some form of business English training. So we're not going to run out of business English teachers anytime soon. Okay. That is pretty much that. I've run over time. I was meant to take only 30 minutes on it, but I don't think that was actually possible. Most of this I think is probably fairly straightforward now, and I've covered. Do your homework before the students arrive. Now, doing your homework obviously means it can mean one of a couple of things. Actually, it means, as I said, you've researched the company. You know what you're talking about with them. It can also mean that you understand a bit more of their culture, something about the group. It can also mean that you're thinking about what you did last time. If you're going to do small talk, of course, as is part of any lesson, what's the best way of doing it? How's your week been? If you can ask any students about things that they mentioned last week, and instantly in goes that little message to them that, oh yeah, right, you were listening to me last week. I talked about a little problem I was having that I was going to have to deal with over the weekend. You asked me about you asked me how that problem went. Great. You've made a friend. You're a listener. Think about trying to do that. That's part of your homework, is noting these things down, mental notes or physical notes, whatever you do, and bringing them back. So you're not just looking at 6 or 12 closed books that you're trying to open anew every single lesson. Go with the flow. Sometimes you can go with the flow more than you can other times. Sometimes it is utterly wonderful. You can, if you do one-to-one lessons with more senior staff, and you walk through the door and they say, I've got a presentation in 2 days' time, help. And it's just great. So you do at that point, chuck your lesson plan out the window. No, you don't actually. You just put it away carefully because it's going to work for the next lesson, saving you a lot of preparation time. And off you go and you work with that presentation. And as I said, the way you work with that presentation is you listen to it and you think, how can that be improved? Obviously, this becomes easier with experience, but you're listening to that intonation. You're listening to how they make their points. You can sometimes be saying, do your presentation better. Obviously, being English teachers, a lot of people, as they may be more creative, and they will be saying, come on, get rid of the text, cut the text right down, get a nice image in there. Come on, let's do it, and actually just really inspiring them to do a much better presentation. And the difference this makes to them, to their morales, to their careers frequently is absolutely immense. And all it took from you was an hour and a half of just going, okay, right, forget about the lesson. Let's focus on this. The aims of the lesson, again, with the caveat that these things can do, make sure that you tell them what they're going to do, what they have done, and have boundaries. These are often hyper-motivated people. Being hyper-motivated, they can often get into a habit of thinking of you as we could say, a Socratic tutor. That's fine. You can be a Socratic tutor when you're in the lesson. Phone numbers, obviously, if you're being sent by a company, you need to know what the protocols are for communication anyway. Be very careful with that communication. If you're comfortable with them having a phone number, it needs to be made sure that that phone number is for practical purposes, cancelling lessons, rescheduling, things like that. They are not to be asking you about English or indeed anything else at any time of their choosing, unless they're darn well paying you for it. You're a professional, they're a professional, they need to respect that as well. If you don't have these boundaries, you will find the occasional person who will step over the mark. So always be very careful with that one. Okay. Everything there is pretty much on the YouTube channel, as are lots and lots of good stuff on there. I do occasionally look at these things myself, and I think how good some of my colleagues are doing these. Quite depressing, actually, at times. Now, what I'm going to do two things. First of all, I would like any questions. I've got one or two here, so thank you for that. I'm going to bring those questions up, but while I'm doing that, I'm just going to also put up the Q&A. So I'll leave that up there for a minute or two. So I'd like you, if you could, to take a little scan, and obviously then you can give your feedback on the webinar. Okay, Just going to have a quick look. Really good question here. Thank you very much. Do you have any communication apps between you and the student while teaching, or simply stick to the lesson plan? I'm not too sure, because this seems to be, I mean, feel free to kind of change this to moderate your question here. Use of communication apps between you and the student while teaching. Again, that very much depends on the protocols of the say, if you have an agency and the agency send you in there, they may be very strict about, no, any communication needs to be through the company, and that's fine. You both need to respect that. But then you also say, or simply stick to the lesson plan. Now, I hope I've made clear by now that you don't always stick to the lesson plan, because the lesson plan is subordinate to the student or students. Obviously, there is a difference here. Now, I think if you have a single student, if you're teaching a one-to-one, then things can digress far, far more. I would also say that is a point there where you need to be very careful. A student can become a friend very quickly. And that's part of your excellence in listening to them, finding what they need. You gain their trust. From their trust comes friendship. With friendship often comes the desire to chat on rather than actually fulfill the aims of the lesson. Bit of chat is okay. Don't look back and find, hell, we're 40 minutes into our lesson and all we've done is talk about our families or our football clubs or whatever it may be. Not a good situation to get into, because eventually they'll remember they're still paying you money for this. In a one-to-one lesson, therefore, it can sometimes be your own discipline that means that you have to go back to a lesson plan. Obviously, in a group, because they have normally have a greater divergence of aims, then you would probably stick to the lesson plan more. Doesn't stop you from going into something and going, hang on, let's have a listen to that. Let's have this. Now, this would be the same in any lesson, so I'll just unpack that a little bit. So say you're in a lesson, you've got the lesson plan, you want to stick to the lesson plan, you've got your lesson aims, quite right. At the same time, then you hear, there's an error, and you, of course, instantly go through and do what a teacher would do, which is you think, okay, what about that error? Right, what kind of error is that? Is that a systemic error? Does it need dealing with? Is it a slip of the tongue? Can I let it go? If it's a systemic error, am I going to deal with it now, or am I just going to make a note and maybe prepare something on it later? And above all, in a group lesson, is this something that by correcting this, it might be a benefit to everybody else? Well, at that point, you do digress from your lesson plan, because you say, okay, then, right, we need to deal with this. We need to deal with this because dealing with it is of benefit to everybody. So well done. You expressed something really, really well there. However, there's a little thing that I want to deal with now. And if you've got the right dynamic in a class, of course, everybody is on board with that. Everybody's okay with that. And the person that you are correcting, again, depending on the culture, depending on the dynamic, should be happy about this as well. If they're not, then you wouldn't be doing it in the first place. And so then you deal with an error, and then you show people what they're doing, what they can be doing. You maybe make a note to do something later on, or to make another little exercise on it for another lesson. There is an okay kind of divergence on this one, and that is the truth for any lesson. Otherwise, yes, the lesson plan, sorry, just to come back to this, the lesson plan should stay as an important part. If you get to the end of the lesson, you think those were the aims and I've not achieved any of them, then you really need to have a think about that. It's a mistake that everybody makes. Everybody makes a mistake of chatting on, letting themselves be sidetracked because you're with people that you like, you're enjoying their company, they're enjoying your company as well, and you digress. Try to make sure that you do it just the once, and then you put a stop to it fairly quickly, even if it's only a personal responsibility, nothing that you put on them. Okay, thank you for that. Do I have any further questions? I'm happy to hang on as long as required. But I'm just trying to see if I can do anything else with you. Okay, thank you. I'll just pop this up. Okay. How to become a teacher in business English at TEFL in practice. TEFL in practice. I'm not sure about the in practice. By not having English as a mother tongue. Okay, well, so English isn't your first language. Remember, it's not going to be the first language, not only of your student, which is perfectly normal, but often of the person that they're going to be communicating with as well, the lingua franca, as we said. With any English teaching, not just business English teaching, the idea is always that you should be a substantial amount above the level of the person that you are teaching. But if you're good enough to be on this course, then that is probably the case anyway. So there shouldn't really be a problem with this that I can see. It might mean that you would not take on the highest levels, but honestly, nowadays it's become less and less of a problem. We've become far more inclusive on this, and even people like me who sort of tend to put the English language on a bit of a pedestal have come much more relaxed about it's your professionalism that is important. It's the fulfillment of the language aims that's important. It's not your first language. So very much it is a possibility. What is needed? One thing you could do with is a qualification in business English, which again, if you're on here, is something that you're very likely working towards. If you have the level of English to get the qualification, both for say level 5 or level 3 or whatever you've done, and a business English level as well, then fine. You're already good enough, so you don't need to worry about that too much. Some people will still turn you down. I repeat my statistic: 1.5 billion people wanting business English. That means there's plenty to go around, and you may find it more difficult in some situations, but you will find a way. Okay. Good point here, Michael. Educational background, retired. Yeah. Needs assessment is paramount to perform initially. Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Right. Next question, it's the last question that Michael gave there was more of a statement. Is the needs assessment process covered in the business? Do you know? I do not know. I don't teach on the business English. I don't teach on that course. I will go through what I've said previously, which is I strongly believe in the needs assessment, not just the process, but the fact that it is not a one size fits all. If you're talking to a business person, now some business people might be happy to take a piece of paper. If you work for a company, they will have conducted a form of needs analysis, and again, a paper-based one online, something like that. They will have conducted that in advance anyway, and that would be a different needs analysis to what you would have in a gen if you were welcoming somebody to a general English course at an English language school. So you've already got that. It might be that the company would provide something as well. This is often the case. If the company are the ones who are paying for the lessons, they may well state the aims that they want. Either way, you've got those, if you like, you've got the paper-based ones or whatever, however, the online ones, the ones that are filled in. What I always say, and I said at the start, more importantly, is what you do. You go in there, you talk, you listen, you follow up, and you really work with that individual to make them clear that they are going to be dealt with. Their individual needs and aspirations are what are going to be taken into account. I would say in that case as well, there is one other thing about this. With the needs analysis, there can sometimes be a discrepancy if the company has come up with a set of needs and then you speak to the student themselves, they have a separate They have a separate suite of needs that they feel. Sometimes, and this is where it all gets kind of a bit Game of Thrones at times, it can be because the student is looking for an out and actually wants to work with a different company and wants to prepare for actually leaving. The company themselves, of course, have an interest in making sure that they try to get the student to do a job that is as good as possible. So there can sometimes be a conflict of interest. At which point I tend to go with who's paying the money, and that's what you do. It is obviously a process of negotiation as well when it comes to anything like that. But again, needs assessment, there should be something written down. Normally there will be, but it doesn't cover everything at all. Okay. Good question and an easy answer. Oh yes. I'd say in this case there are kind of three. There are three kind of levels to this. Adults are easier than kids, and business adults are easier than adults. If you teach in an English language school, then it tends to be that people are very young. They're away from home for the first time, so you therefore have to deal with their social lives, their hangovers, and the fact that they're away from mum and dad for the first time and they're really going to enjoy themselves on it. And so therefore English is often a distant second in their list of priorities. On the other hand, with business adults, they tend to know their path in life a great deal more, and they can see how what they're doing fits into it. So it is most certainly easier. And what I love about it is that the issues that you get with them is largely about their high expectations, which you are quite rightly expected to fulfill. So it's a proper challenge in that way. There comes a time in any teacher's life when they've really had enough of, dancing like a clown at the front while to an unresponsive bunch of people, and you want to kick on, you want to do something which is really, really worthwhile both to you and to them. If you're very lucky, that'll be the first job you work into, and it's brilliant. Most of us will go through various places and various iterations where you're teaching people who, are there. I mean, if they're teaching kids, it's because mum and dad want them to be there. It's a great job. Again, if you can do it well, I am open mouthed with admiration at people who can teach children and get there and keep their attention and keep their involvement. I can't do it. I can't do it with my own kids, and I can't do it with anybody else's. So it's for somebody else. Well done if you can do that. Hats off to you if you can do that. But for most of us, we want to step beyond just the dealing with the more fallible amongst us. We want to go beyond having to deal with discipline and go on to just working with people who want to be taught. So long answer. I've just given you the short answer. Yes, yes, yes. It's definitely easier than teaching kids. Okay. Again, I'll leave it up for another 30 seconds because I'm very happy to answer any further questions. Otherwise, I will say thank you to you all, and good night or good afternoon or good morning or good middle of the night, depending on where you are, because I see you have come from just an absolutely fascinating range of places, pretty much the four corners of the globe if I thought it was flat. So thank you ever so much for that, and very much appreciated. Okay, and I will ring off now. Thank you again.